I want to start at the end. 2:25 in the morning, June 29th, 1967. US Highway 90, somewhere between Biloxi and New Orleans. A 1966 Buick Electra is doing somewhere between 60 and 80 miles an hour through the Louisiana night. In the front seat is a 19-year-old driver named Ronald Harrelson and a lawyer named Sam Brody and a woman who was, at that exact moment, the most photographed person in America. In the back seat, 3 children asleep. Up ahead, though, partially hidden behind a cloud of insecticide fog from a city mosquito spraying truck, a tractor trailer has slowed down to about 35 miles an hour, and the Buick, it doesn't slow down. The car hits the back of the trailer at full speed. The trailer doesn't have an underride guard, so no rear bumper extension, nothing to keep the lower car from sliding completely underneath. So the Buick, it slides under, and the top of the car shears off. All 3 adults in the front seat die instantaneously. And the 3 children in the back seat, they survive. The youngest is 3 years old, and she'll carry a zigzag scar on the side of her head for the rest of her life. She won't remember the crash. She'll grow up, though, to become one of the most recognized faces in American television. You know her as Captain Olivia Benson on Law and Order SVU. Her real name, though, is Mariska Hargitay, and her mother was Jayne Mansfield. Now, Jayne, she was 34 years old when she died, and depending on who you ask, she was a genius, a blonde bombshell, Hollywood's answer to Marilyn Monroe, a desperate publicity hound, and a talented actress who never got the roles she deserved, a devoted mother of 5, a practicing Catholic, a practicing Satanist, or some combination of all those things at once. She was also the reason that every truck on an American highway today carries a steel bar extending below the back of its trailer. That bar is called a Mansfield bar. It exists because she died without one, and it wasn't made mandatory until 1998, 31 years after her death. So Jayne Mansfield, she changed the trucking industry from the front seat of a 1966 Buick. That's the kind of legacy that does not fit neatly inside any of the stories that people usually tell about her. And that mismatch between who she actually was and who we made her into is what tonight's episode is all about. This is the full story of it, all of it. The parts that are documented, the parts that are disputed, and the parts that are genuinely, unmistakably strange. You're listening to Just Killing Time with Elizabeth Stanton. True crime and conspiracy stories. Stories that keep you up at night. Tonight is a deep dive on one of the most fascinating, most misunderstood women in Hollywood history. There's a lot to cover here. There's the career, the marriages, the kids, the Church of Satan. And that everybody wants to know about that part. And of course, the crash, the safety law that bears her name, and a daughter who grew up in her shadow and eventually told the world her mother's real story. So let's get into it. Jayne Mansfield was born Vera Jayne Palmer on April 19th, 1933, in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. Her father, Herbert Palmer, was a successful attorney. Her mother, also named Vera, which is going to get confusing fast, has been a school teacher, so it's a comfortable family. Things are good. Then, when Jayne Mansfield was 3 years old, her father has a heart attack while driving a car. He died, and Jayne was in the car with him. So I want you to hold on to that detail for just a second, because it's going to come back at the end of this episode in a way that I genuinely don't know what to do with. Jayne Mansfield was 3 years old when her father died in a car crash she was a passenger in. 31 years later, her own daughter, Mariska, was only 3 years old when Jayne died in a car crash that Mariska was a passenger in. 2 generations of 3-year-old girls, both in the car, both surviving the crash that killed a parent in each case. And I'm not calling it fate. I'm not going to call it a curse, but it is documented and it is exact. And it's the kind of thing that you feel like when you're reading a story that somebody wrote rather than a sequence of events that actually happened to real human beings. So after her father's death, Jayne's mother eventually remarried and the family moved to Dallas. So Jayne grew up in Texas, and by any measure, she was not an ordinary kid. She was playing the violin in public by age 7. She'd stand out on her driveway performing for whoever happened to walk by. She studied piano very seriously, and she had a real gift for languages and would eventually become fluent in French, Spanish, and German. Italian, though, it came later. And throughout her life, she claimed an IQ of 163. Whether that specific number is accurate is impossible to verify. And she took a test as a child with the documentation that's been lost for decades. But every single person who knew her, who worked with her, who interviewed her at length came back to the same observation. She was significantly smarter than the character she played in public. According to her daughter, Mariska Hargitay, she said, "My mother was this amazing, beautiful, glamorous sex symbol, but people did not know that she played the violin and had a 160 IQ and had 5 kids and loved dogs. She was just so ahead of her time." So at a Christmas party in 1949, a 16-year-old Vera Jayne Palmer met a 20-year-old university student named Paul Mansfield, and they fell in love. They got married in January of 1950, a few months before she graduated from high school, and she was pregnant by November. Their daughter, Jayne Marie Mansfield, was born just a year later. Now, a lot of young women in 1950s married with a baby at 17 years old would have set their ambitions aside. Jayne Mansfield, she did not. She enrolled at Southern Methodist University, and then she transferred to the University of Texas at Austin to study drama. And she acted in local productions. She had a plan, and the plan did not involve being anybody's housewife. When Paul got drafted for the Korean War and shipped overseas, she didn't sit and wait. She moved out to California and started taking drama courses at UCLA. The marriage did eventually fall apart, and the reason it fell apart is itself a tell about who Jayne was. Paul wanted a conventional life back in Dallas, and Jayne wanted Hollywood. And when they got divorced, Paul tried to get custody of their daughter, and his strategy was to use Jayne's pinup photographs as evidence that she was an unfit mother. The court rejected that argument, thankfully, right? Jayne kept the name Mansfield because she thought it sounded like a movie star. So she kept his name because it sounded like a movie star. That one little detail tells you everything about how deliberately Jayne was constructing her persona. The platinum blonde hair, that was a dye job. She was a natural brunette. And the breathy voice was performed, the dumb blonde routine. Well, that exactly was just an act. And she said once, "I know the secret of making the audience laugh. It's simple. First, be yourself." But here's the catch. Being Jayne Mansfield was already itself a performance. She was performing, quote unquote, Jayne Mansfield, while the actual Vera Jayne Palmer, the violinist, the 5-language polyglot, the woman with the genius level IQ, sat inside that costume and watched. Now, Jayne, she hit Hollywood in the early 50s and spent several years getting absolutely nowhere. Bit parts, minor roles, nothing breaking through, so she pivoted. If real acting roles weren't coming, fine. She'd make herself impossible to ignore. So she started crashing press events. She had a publicist named who would arrange Christmas morning photographs of her in a red bikini at a press junket for a Jane Russell film. And the headline ran, "Jayne outpoints Jayne." So I like that. She camped outside casting directors' offices for days, and she reportedly wrote her measurements, 36, 22, 34, on a piece of paper and had it delivered to a producer and got hired that same day. In 1955, she landed on Broadway in Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter? The reviews for the play were kind of lukewarm, and the reviews for Jayne were rapturous. 20th Century Fox came calling with a 6-year contract. They wanted their own Marilyn Monroe, somebody to fill that blonde bombshell space without dealing with Marilyn's unpredictability. What they got was somebody arguably smarter and in a lot of ways more ambitious. And in 9 months between September of 56 and May of 57, Jayne Mansfield appeared in 2,500 newspaper photographs. She joked later that the evangelist Billy Graham knew more about her measurements than he did about the Second Commandment. Her 1956 film, The Girl Can't Help It, it was a genuine hit. It was smart, funny, self-aware, rock and roll comedy where she played a character who knew she was a caricature and leaned all the way into it. Critics noticed, and she won the Golden Globe for New Star of the Year in 1957. Roger Ebert, he later wrote a glowing retrospective. She was talented, and she was also increasingly trapped. Fox wanted the bombshell. Fox did not want the violinist. Every time Jayne tried to demonstrate range, and on British television, she gave Shakespearean recitations and played piano and violin live, and the critics ate it up. Fox would push her right back into the cleavage and into the baby talk. And the studio was using her body as a product, and they had no interest in the intelligence inside of it. By the early 60s, the era of blonde bombshell was already shifting. Marilyn Monroe was struggling and would be dead by 1962. The country was changing, the mod era, the early women's movement, a new kind of sexuality on screen that was less exaggerated and more authentic. Jayne's particular brand of amplified femininity went from cutting edge to parody almost overnight. Fox stopped casting her in big films, and then Fox stopped casting her in any films, and then Fox dropped her. So in 1955, while Jayne was on Broadway in The Rock Hunter, she made a guest appearance on a Mae West show. One of the muscle men in Mae West's entourage was a Hungarian-born bodybuilder named Mickey Hargitay, and he had just won the title of Mr. Universe. Jayne took one look at him and called it love at first sight. Now, Mickey was born in Budapest in 1926. He'd come to the United States as a refugee after World War II, and he built himself basically from scratch into one of the most physically impressive men in the country. He was warm, he was devoted, and he was funny. And by every account, he was absolutely smitten with Jayne. So they got married in January of 1958. They appeared in films together, including The Loves of Hercules, which gave Jayne the excuse to act opposite as an actual Hercules. They had 3 kids, Mickey Jr. in December of 1958, Zoltan in August of 1960, and Mariska in January of 1964. Jayne and Mickey also bought and then completely redecorated a property on 10100 Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood that became known nationally as the Pink Palace. Everything was pink. The exterior walls were pink, the carpet, the bathrooms, the kitchen appliances. Jayne drove a pink Rolls-Royce. She had pink poodles. There was a heart-shaped swimming pool in the backyard, and the phrase living like a movie star just really doesn't do it justice. Hollywood publicist Jim Byron, who helped engineer most of Jayne's early career, said this about her. Jayne had a star quality. She was very much like a raw gem. The Pink Palace was, in part, a set built to confirm her character, an extension of the Jayne Mansfield performance into 3D. But by all accounts, it was also a real home. And Jayne, she loved her kids fiercely. The house was full of animals. She had chihuahuas everywhere, a lion cub at one point. Can I just stop for just a second? Is that not the most ridiculous Hollywood nonsense you can ever hear? Is, you know what my house needs? It needs a lion. But I want it to be a baby lion. I'll take a lion cub. So she's got a lion cub at one point living in her house. And there was an actual family living there too. So, anywho, August of 1966, Jayne's 6-year-old son, Zoltan, was mauled by a lion at Jungle Land. That deserves a pause. So Jungle Land's an animal park in Thousand Oaks, California. Zoltan had lost his hat. He reached back through the bars to grab it, and the lion grabbed him by the head. He had to have emergency brain surgery. He survived, but barely, and it was devastating. So, Anton LaVEY, and we are absolutely going to get to him in just a moment, performed what he described as a mountaintop ritual to assist in Zoltan's recovery. When Zoltan survived and recovered, Jayne publicly credited LaVEY for it, which at one point, in the very complicated question of whether her relationship with LaVEY was genuinely spiritual belief, or it was theatrical performance, or some combination of those two. So back to the marriage with Mickey Hargitay, by most accounts, the most genuine romantic relationship of Jayne's life. Mickey was the one ex-husband who showed up to her funeral. After her death, he remarried, but he raised Jayne's children, including Mariska, with his new wife, Ellen. He was there for SVU's 100th episode, playing a witness in a small role just to be in his daughter's world. He died in 2006 at age 80, and Mariska said that he was, quote, her everything, her idol. And there's something genuinely moving about all of that. Mickey Hargitay, Mr. Universe, 1955, married a woman the world saw as a dumb blonde joke, and saw her as the whole person she actually was. And he stayed until the divorce. And then he stayed for the children. And then he kept the faith with her memory until the day he died. Not everybody in Jayne Mansfield's life gave her that, but he did. And I think that's just beautiful. So by 1963, Fox had dropped her, and she'd already moved on to a third marriage to an Italian-American director named Matt Cimber, which produced one more child, her son Antonio, and fell apart within 2 years. She was doing nightclub appearances in Las Vegas for $35,000 a week, which sounds like a fortune until you remember that the Pink Palace had mortgages, and the Chihuahuas, they had vet bills, and Jayne Mansfield was headlining the Dunes Hotel was not the same as Jayne Mansfield being a contract player at 20th Century Fox. So in 1963, she did something almost no major American actress had done up to that point. She took a nude starring role in a Hollywood motion picture. The film was Promises. It generated enormous press coverage, and it accomplished basically nothing for her career. The kind of attention it brought was the wrong kind. And then there was Sam Brody. Samuel S. Brody was a divorce attorney, and the irony here is genuinely something he handled Jayne's divorce from Mickey Hargitay. By 1966, he was also her de facto manager and her boyfriend. People who knew both of them described the relationship as controlling and combustible. Brody apparently wanted to manage every part of Jayne's professional life. He was possessive, he was aggressive, and he was jealous of just about anyone who got close to her, including Anton LaVEY. So, who was Anton LaVEY? He's Anton Casander LaVEY. He was born Howard Stanton, that's my name, Howard Stanton LaVEY in Chicago of 1930. He reinvented himself comprehensively over the course of his life, from former carnival worker, former police photographer, amateur lion tamer. That detail, just right back again. He was an organist, an occultist, a showman, and eventually on April 30th, 1960, wow, this is going to be a good name to say, Walpurgisnacht, a German pagan spring festival. He was the founder and self-appointed high priest of the Church of Satan. He lived in what he called the Black House on California Street in San Francisco. He shaved his head. He wore black robes. He kept a pet lion named Toger in the house with him. Another dang lion, people. What are we doing with the lions? Okay, but he surrounded himself with followers who came to weekly satanic rituals, which were in practice theatrical performances that combined occult ceremony with philosophy and shock value, and presided over by what one anthropologist called a colorful figure of personal magnetism. Now, LaVEY's Satanism was not the Hollywood version. It wasn't devil worship in any traditional sense. He didn't believe in a literal Satan. And I think that's an interesting little fact, especially when you think about episode, the one with the Babylon working. So that was episode 9. And we talked about the Satanism in there, that they didn't believe there was an actual Satan. I think that's interesting. Anywho, Anton LaVEY, his philosophy was closer to radical individualism wrapped in theatrical aesthetics. Embrace your own desires, reject conventional morality, be the best sinner on the block. Some people compared him to Hugh Hefner. Same basic message, just a different costume. According to Douglas Ebersole, who was the co-director of Mansfield in 66 and 67, in an interview magazine, this is what he said. Anton LaVEY was like Hugh Hefner. He just used the word Satan to get attention, but his whole thing was about empowering people and rebuking Catholicism. So Jayne and Sam Brody came to San Francisco in 1966 for the San Francisco International Film Festival. And there's some dispute about exactly how Jayne ended up at LaVEY's door. Some sources say she'd heard of him at the festival and just showed up uninvited. Others say she'd arranged the meeting in advance. Either way, Jayne arrived at the Black House, and she met the man in the black robes with the shaved head and the lion, and by every count, she was genuinely captivated. Must have been the lion, I guess. So LaVEY gave her a medallion. He also gave her a title, High Priestess of San Francisco's Church of Satan. The media, predictably, lost its mind. Photographs got taken. Jayne and LaVEY at the Pink Palace. Jayne and LaVEY at restaurants around Los Angeles. Jayne and LaVEY at the heart-shaped pool, which I think that's kind of ironic. You know, the Pink Palace and the Black House and a heart-shaped pool to go with the Church of Satan. I mean, this story is just full of all these little idiosyncrasies. So the headlines, they ran for weeks, and it was exactly the kind of attention Jayne had been engineering her whole career. But was she a true believer? That question turns out to be a genuinely complicated one. Jayne herself gave contradictory signals about it. She called LaVEY, quote, a genius, and she said she found him very interesting, but she also publicly identified as Catholic. She was actually in the process of converting to Judaism for Sam Brody at the time of her death. And she said on record, I am a Catholic and would not believe in his church. I am not a member of the Black Circle. Now, LaVEY's daughter, Carla, on the other hand, claimed on Joan Rivers' talk show in 1992 that Jayne was absolutely a practicing Satanist, and that she had joined the church, and that she'd had a very romantic relationship with Carla's father. Now, Carla's claims could be genuine. They could be the kind of posthumous legend building that LaVEY himself specialized in for his entire career. He had famously known to be inflating his own mythology anytime the opportunity ever came up. Now, here's how I read the Mansfield-LaVEY connection, for what it's worth, and your mileage may vary on this one. I think both of them were primarily performing. LaVEY was a showman who built a whole career out of dressing up, self-help philosophy, and satanic cosplay, and getting maximum press coverage for it. And then Jayne Mansfield had spent her entire adult life maintaining a persona designed to attract attention. When these two people found each other in 1966, it was a meeting of spiritual kindred spirits and more of a collision in like two professional attention seekers who recognized something of themselves in each other. Now, that doesn't make it any less interesting. If anything, it makes it more interesting because two people who were both performing also seemed to genuinely like each other. And LaVEY held a memorial service for Jayne after her death, and he expressed real grief. So whatever was real between them, something was real. And the question I keep coming back to, honestly, is there something in LaVEY's actual message that be yourself, own your desires, your sexuality is not shameful? That's the core of his philosophy. And Jayne found that genuinely resonant. She'd spent her whole career being the thing men wanted, while she was being told by everyone around her that what she was doing was shameful. Too much. You're embarrassing. A philosophy that said exactly the opposite of all that might have landed differently than just publicity and that strategy. Now, Sam Brody did not like LaVEY. He called him a charlatan. He challenged LaVEY's relationship with Jayne, and at some point, accounts vary on the exact details, Brody went over to the Black House and reportedly desecrated it or destroyed or some of, LaVEY's spiritual ritual objects. His sacred satanic talismans, as one of the accounts puts it. LaVEY's response was theatrical, specific, and depending on your perspective, either a genuine act of dark magic or an extremely effective piece of psychological manipulation. Anton LaVEY reportedly to Sam Brody sometime in 1966, and the exact wording kind of varies across sources, but substance is consistent across all those accounts. He said this: "My power exceeds anything you can imagine, and now you're going to feel it. You will be dead in a year. Sam Brody, I pronounce that you will be dead within a year." What happened after that is a matter of documented record, however you choose to interpret it. After the curse was pronounced, Sam Brody was involved in no fewer than 6 car accidents and near crashes before the fatal one. So 6 separate incidences, and Jayne was present for or involved in several of them. Zoltan, he was mauled by a lion. Back to the lions again. LaVEY did the mountaintop ritual, and Zoltan, he recovered. And LaVEY, as Interview magazine documented, was photographed cutting out pictures of himself from a German magazine in his Black House on the night Jayne and Brody died. The fatal crash happened on June 29, 1967. Less than 18 days after the last time Jayne and LaVEY had been photographed together. It happened in the 7th car-related incident involving Brody since the curse was spoken. And it happened in a car exactly as LaVEY had specified. Now, LaVEY said later, and this is where it genuinely gets a little stranger, that he had not intended for Jayne to die. The curse was on Brody. Jayne, in his own framing, was collateral damage. And he really did express genuine great remorse. And later on the record, he said, quote unquote, "I don't feel there was a curse on Miss Mansfield as such, but there certainly was a curse on Mr. Brody all over." So I'm not telling you that Anton LaVEY had supernatural powers that caused a car accident in Louisiana on the highway in the middle of the night. What I am telling you is that one man pronounced to another man that he would die in a car accident within a year. And that man died in a car accident within a year, specifically inside about 10 months. And in the seventh car-related incident since the curse was spoken. LaVEY himself had a specific explanation for how curses work in his worldview. And it's not supernatural intervention. He believed in the psychological power of a pronounced curse to make the cursed person reckless, distracted, unlucky. The self-fulfilling prophecy version of that explanation. Did Sam Brody drive differently after being told he was going to die in a car? Did he drink more? Did he make worse decisions? I mean, we're never going to know. What I do know is that two people who were both essentially professional fabulists who built their careers on performance and persona and the management of public perception found each other in 1966. And 1 year later, one of them was dead and the other held a memorial service for her. Make of that what you will. I've been sitting with it for, weeks as I researched this, and I generally do not know what to make of it myself. So, time killers. Here's the question I want you to ask yourself. Do you believe in curses? Not necessarily satanic curses specifically, but the idea that spoken intent, pronounced with force, and aimed at a specific person can affect outcomes of the real world. Was Sam Brody the victim of dark magic or psychological suggestion or just pure coincidence? Or was it his reckless behavior? And here's the harder question. Does it actually matter which one of these it was if the outcome is the same regardless? So tell me what you think. Email me at justkillingtimepodcast@gmail.com. And I want you to know I read every single one of your emails. So back to that night. On the night of June 28th, 1967, Jayne Mansfield was performing at Gus Stevens' Supper Club in Biloxi, Mississippi. It was the kind of booking she'd been doing for years now. Nightclub appearances, sometimes described unkindly by reporters as lounge shows, but was still drawing crowds. Jayne could still fill a room. She had retained that much. After midnight, the party set off for New Orleans, and Jayne had a TV appearance on the WDSU's midday show the next day. The group in the car was Ronald Harrelson, age 19, a driver employed by the Supper Club. Then there was Sam Brody, her lawyer and boyfriend, and then Jayne herself. 3 of her children, Miklos, Zoltan, and little Mariska, age 3, and 4 chihuahuas. Brody apparently had a leg injury that prevented him from driving himself, which is why Harrison was at the wheel. That's an interesting little tidbit, isn't it? The car was a 1966 Buick Electra 225, and at approximately 2:25 in the morning on U.S. Highway 90, about a mile west of Rigolet Bridge, the Buick encountered a situation that had no good outcome. Up ahead, on the road, a city truck was spraying insecticide for mosquito control. The spray created a fog, like a fog-like mist, all across the highway. Behind the sprayer, though, a tractor-trailer had slowed from 50 miles an hour to 35 to try to navigate through that mist. And the Buick, though, was traveling at 60 to 80 miles an hour, and the driver had maybe 2 seconds of warning. And then the car hit the back of that trailer. Because the trailer didn't have that underride guard, that rear bumper extension, the Buick slid right underneath. And the trailer's rear axle made contact with the roof of the car and just sheared it almost completely off. Ronald Harrelson, Sam Brody, and Jayne Mansfield all died instantly. Jayne was 34 years old. The 3 children in the back seat, asleep and presumably probably lying down across the seat, survived with minor injuries. Mariska, who was 3 years and 5 months old, had a zigzag scar on the side of her head that she still carries to this day. She has no memory of the accident. There's a persistent myth that Jayne Mansfield was decapitated in the crash. She was not. The myth came from police photographs of the crime scene that appeared to show a blonde-haired head tangled in the smashed windshield area. That was Jayne's wig. It came off in the impact. Her actual cause of death, as listed on her death certificate, is, and I'm reading the clinical language directly here, it's a crushed skull with avulsion of cranium and brain. Avulsion means tearing away. The impact tore away portions of her skull and her brain, and she died of catastrophic head trauma. She was not decapitated. The myth was wrong 58 years ago, and it's still wrong today, and it's probably going to keep circulating, though, for another 58 years. There's something really revealing about the decapitation myth, and what it says is not really about Jayne, what it says about us. The actual cause of death is horrifying on its own: catastrophic skull damage and trauma. These 3 adults were killed instantly, and 3 kids asleep in the back seat who woke up inside that wreckage. The reality of that night is genuinely awful. And we as a culture reach for something even more grotesque. We needed the story to be more extreme than it already was. And so we made up the part about decapitation, and we shared it for 58 years. And I think that says something about how Jayne Mansfield was treated by the very culture that made her. She spent her whole career being turned into something exaggerated and not real, larger than life, more extreme, more outrageous than any actual woman could be. And even in death, the same culture had made her a caricature, could not let her be a real human being who died a real and terrible death. It had to be more. It always had to be more. So when the passenger car, traveling at highway speed, hits the back of a tractor trailer, the physics are brutal. The truck bed sits so much higher than the hood of a car. There's no bumper on a commercial trailer, so the car doesn't bounce off. It just slides underneath, and the trailer structure makes contact with the passenger compartment at windshield or roof level, and the survival rate of the people in the front seat is approximately 0. This was understood before Jayne died. There had been actual federal regulations on the books since 1953 requiring some form of rear protection on certain trailers, but the regulations were very vague, and they were minimally, not really enforced. And there were no real standards for strength or effectiveness. Most trucks on the road in 1967 had nothing. Now, after Jayne's death, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration recommended requiring underride guards on all tractor trailers. So strong, standardized steel bars attached under the rear of trailers, specifically engineered to prevent cars from sliding underneath. The trucking industry objected. Oh, we're going to add weight, added cost, structural challenge to the trailers themselves? Ugh, no way. We don't want to do that. So throughout the 70s and the 80s, the proposal moved slowly through regulatory channels. The NHTSA actually withdrew its formal proposal in the early 80s under pressure from the industry and from the newly elected Reagan administration's deregulatory push. The requirement, though, was finally implemented in 1998, 31 years after the crash that made it necessary. According to the NHTSA regulations and Coffey McFarland's law firm documentation, this is what they said. Mandatory on all tractor trailers manufactured after 1998 must be strong enough to withstand significant force. Specific height and structural requirements, updated strength standards in 2022. Annual underride fatalities estimated by NHTSA over 400 per year. The side underride accidents not covered by the Mansfield bar, approximately 200 additional fatalities per year. So every truck on American highway is now legally required to carry this device. And every single one of you have followed one on the interstate. Everyone you've ever pulled up behind on a 2-lane road, they all have it. The official name is Rear Underride Guard, or ICC bumper. The name people actually use, the truckers, the lawyers, the safety engineers, is the Mansfield bar. And I want to say something about this that might sound strange. The Mansfield bar is the most significant thing that has Jayne Mansfield's name on it. More significant than any film, and more significant than the Pink Palace. More significant than the Church of Satan's chapter or the 2,500 newspaper photographs in 9 months, or any headline she's ever generated. It is a piece of steel, and it is on the truck, and it has been saving lives every single day since it was required. And it will keep saving lives long after the last person who personally remembers Jayne Mansfield is gone. Jayne spent her career trying to be taken seriously, trying to get roles that used her intelligence rather than her body, trying to be seen as more than a character she built to get noticed. And what she's most remembered for, ultimately, is a piece of safety equipment that exists because she died without it. That is not the legacy she would have chosen, but it is real, and it matters, and every time it prevents a death, Jayne Mansfield saves a life. And I think that's worth saying out loud. After the crash, Mariska and her brothers Miklos and Zoltan, they were raised by their father Mickey Hargitay and his new wife Ellen. Mickey had married Ellen in 1968, and by all accounts, Ellen embraced the children completely. Mariska said about her later, "I called her mom. We were blessed that she really embraced us and loved us so quickly. I was very fortunate to have a maternal figure in my life after such a horrific accident." Now, Jayne's estate, when it all got sorted out, was essentially insolvent. She'd accumulated about $500,000 in debt by the time she had died. The Pink Palace was gone, the pink Rolls-Royce gone, but Mickey and Ellen ended up supporting the children financially. So Mariska, she grew up in Los Angeles knowing exactly who her mother was. Everybody knew, but having almost no direct memory of her. She told IMDb once that she could only remember 2 specific events from her time with Jayne. Once when Jayne served her breakfast, and once when Jayne was rubbing her head while they were lying in bed together. 2 memories from 3 years of life. Everything else is photographs, films, and interviews, and other people's recollections. Jayne Mansfield received her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 1960 at the height of her fame. And she was 27 years old when she got that star. And on November 8th, 2013, Mariska Hargitay received the 2,511th star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. The Hollywood Chamber of Commerce placed it directly next to her mother's. I think that's very special. And they placed it at 6328 Hollywood Boulevard. And they sit side by side in the sidewalk now. Mother and daughter, 53 years apart. That kind of gets me right in the feelers. Mariska, she brought Jayne's Golden Globe Award, which had been uncovered randomly in a storage unit, to the ceremony. And she placed it next to her own Golden Globe. 2 trophies side by side, 2 stars in the sidewalk, 2 women, one of whom never got to meet her grown-up daughter. In May of 2025, Mariska Hargitay did something extraordinary while promoting a documentary she'd made about her mother, titled My Mom, Jayne. It was premiering at the Cannes Film Festival, and Mariska revealed publicly for the first time that Mickey Hargitay was not her biological father. Her actual biological father, she disclosed, is Nelson Sardelli, an Italian-Brazilian singer with whom Jayne had had an affair during a period when she was separated from Mickey in 1963. And Mickey had briefly reconciled afterwards, so Mariska was born in January 1964, and the reconciliation didn't last. And unfortunately, they divorced later that year. Mariska didn't learn the truth herself until she was 25 years old. She had grown up as Mariska Hargitay, and Mickey's daughter, in every way that mattered to her without ever knowing the full story. She told Vanity Fair, "I grew up where I was supposed to, and I do know that everyone made the best choice for me." She also went on to say, "Losing my mother at such an early age is the scar of my soul." So I want to close on the Mariska section with one detail that I think is the most beautiful thing in this entire story. On the set of Law and Order SVU, Mariska Hargitay keeps a photograph of Jayne Mansfield on her desk. Not in a drawer, not in a dressing room, on her desk. So in every shot, she sits down, she plays Olivia Benson, tough, compassionate detective who spends her days fighting for people who've been failed by systems that were supposed to protect them. Jayne is right there. Mariska told People magazine in 2018 that her mother was so ahead of her time, a woman with a genius IQ and a concert violinist talent and 5 children who loved her, trapped inside an industry that wanted her to be a prop. In 2025, Mariska made a documentary about Jayne so that the world would finally see her mother whole. And I think that's worth saying out loud, you know? So in 2025, Mariska made that documentary about Jayne so that the world would finally see her mother whole. She premiered it at the Canes. She screened it at Tribeca. And she has been telling her mother's actual story, not the caricature, not the punchline, not the Satanist or the dumb blonde, for her entire adult life. And not about the Mansfield bar. Although the Mansfield bar matters. But not about the Walk of Fame star, although that matters too. The daughter who went looking for her as a whole person and found her. Time killers. Here's a couple of questions for you out of this episode, and I want real answers. First, do you believe in the curse? Do you believe in curses? Was what happened to Sam Brody, do you think it was an actual result of LaVEY's curse, or coincidence, or psychological suggestion, or something else entirely? Tell me what you actually think. Second is Jayne Mansfield. She spent her whole career being seen as a dumb blonde while acting, while she was literally not a dumb blonde at all. She was one of the smartest people in any room she walked into. Do you know somebody kind of like that? I mean, somebody whose intelligence got dismissed because of how they looked or how they dressed. And the third one, this is the big one. So, time killers. Do you have a true crime case, a local conspiracy, a story from your community that deserves a wider audience? Something that happened near you that was never fully explained? A cold case, a disappearance, a death that the official story does not quite account for? If so, send it to me. And the email address is justkillingtimepodcast@gmail.com. Put in the subject line, it says Time Killer Files. So send me your time killer file about something that has happened in your community or something that you know about personally. And the best submissions, they will go on air in a dedicated time killer file episode. So where your stories are just the whole episode. And I think that's kind of a cool thing to do. So just know, when you do email me at justkillingtimepodcast@gmail.com, I read every single one of your emails. So let's get to the end of this. We have Vera Jayne Palmer, who was born in April of 1933 in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. Her father, who died in a car crash when she was 3 years old. She grew up in Texas playing the violin in her driveway. She put a platinum wig and a baby doll voice and engineered one of the most successful self-promotion campaigns in Hollywood history. 2,500 newspaper photographs in only 9 months. And she played Shakespeare on British television, and she got reviews calling her extraordinary. She had those 5 children. She loved them fiercely, and they loved her back. She met the founder of the Church of Satan at a film festival in San Francisco, and he pronounced a curse on her boyfriend. And her boyfriend died in the car crash within the year, and she died in that same crash. And remember, her 3-year-old daughter survived with that zigzag scar on her head and no memory of the accident. And I personally believe that's a blessing not to remember that. And she grew up to become one of the longest running leads in American television history. And in 2025 made a documentary to show the world who her mother actually was. And every truck on American highway carries a steel bar below the rear of its trailer, and it's called the Mansfield Bar, and it's saving lives quietly every single day. That is who Jayne Mansfield was. Not a dumb blonde, not a Satanist, not a cautionary tale. A smart, driven, complicated woman who never got the credit she deserved while she was alive, and who is finally getting it now. I'm Elizabeth Stanton. This has been Just Killing Time. Send your stories, your opinions, and your time killer files to justkillingtimepodcast@gmail.com. I read every single one of them. Thanks for killing some time with me today.
Alexa, what is a chemtrail?
Chemtrail, trails left by aircraft, are actually chemical or biological agents deliberately sprayed at high altitudes for a purpose undisclosed to the general public in clandestine programs directed by government officials.